Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much today for joining us for this webinar. My name is Pamela Anson, and I am the Director of Outreach at the Better Business Bureau serving Greater Cleveland. Today we have the Department of Commerce with us, and they'll be presenting a webinar on protecting our financial or avoiding financial fraud. If you have any questions during this webinar, please feel free to type them out in the questions box. We'll be able to answer them throughout the webinar, and we'll also have a chance at the end of the webinar to answer any of your questions. Today we have Dan Orzano, and he is from the Department of Commerce, and then also presenting will be Victoria Yurkovich, and she is also from the Department of Commerce, and we're very excited to have you today. So thank you so much, Dan, and I pass the mic to you to get started.
Well, thank you, Pam, and thanks everybody for joining us today. We appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you about protecting yourself from all kinds of fraud. As Pam said, I'm Dan Orzano. I'm the Manager of Outreach and Communication for the Securities Division, and Victoria, my colleague, supports our Division of Financial Institutions, and we'll kind of tell you a little bit about each of those as we go along. And as Pam said, if you have any questions, let us know. We'll be happy to answer what we can. So just a little bit about the Department of Commerce. We're made up of 7 divisions. As I said, I'm the division of with the Securities and Financial Institutions is Victoria's realm. As you can see on the screen, there are 5 other divisions, and also the Marijuana Control Program, which is fairly new for us, but you can see, we deal with a lot of different types of businesses. Liquor control is probably one a lot of people might be familiar with. Unclaimed funds might be another one. A few that maybe you not have heard of as much: industrial compliance, real estate and professional licensing. And so we are primarily the state's regulator for all kinds of businesses in Ohio. So overall, we all want to try to keep Ohio residents safe, sound, and secure. That's kind of our mantra these days. As I mentioned before, I'm with the Division of Securities. So this is a very specific area within the Department of Commerce. So I want to talk a little bit more about what is a security, a little bit about some of the things we see from securities fraud standpoint, and again, provide you some tips on how to avoid being defrauded. So first of all, I want to talk about what exactly is a security. According to Ohio's securities law, a very basic definition is when a person gives something of value, and it's usually money, to another person and expects a return at some point. So if you think about if you have an investment, you're giving your money to a person or an entity to invest that money, and at some point you would hope for a return. I'll talk a little bit later about risk, but that's kind of the gist of how we define securities in Ohio. Another interesting point is that as an investor, your investment is considered passive. That is, you don't have control of that investment on a daily basis. You're giving that control to a person who, along with you, has decided, here's how we want to invest your money. That's based on a lot of factors, your risk factor and things like that, what your goals are. So you don't really have actual control every day of that. Securities are not just stocks and bonds. That's probably something that most people think about when they think about an investment or a security. But you could also invest in things like oil and gas drilling. A lot of this happened here in Ohio a number of years ago when they found large quantities of shale gas. So there was a lot of investment going on, specifically in Ohio. That still goes on today. Promissory notes, that's another one we hear a lot about. Promissory note is basically a loan that you're making to a person or a company, and at some point, again, you expect some kind of a return on that investment. Real estate, that's one probably a lot of you may be familiar with. You can invest in all kinds of real estate, whether it's rehabbing properties, investing in new properties, whatever the case may be. But again, however that's packaged, that could be considered an investment. There's also a lot of complex products, and these are things that the experts who deal with this every day know a lot more about, but as a consumer, it's important to educate yourself on these kinds of products, because if you're working with somebody, they may offer a product and you really want to make sure you know what you're talking about. So you may hear terms like exchange traded funds or annuities, things like this. So again, securities is a complicated issue, but it's good to know what you're getting into before you spend your hard-earned money. So let me talk a little bit about the areas that we're responsible for as a division. I like to talk about the division as 4 Ps. The first P is the people. We have an area that licenses those who sell investment products, stockbrokers. If you're an investment advisor, you have to be licensed to do what you do. And this happens at both the state and the federal level. So that's the first P. The second P is products. We have another area within our division that looks at private placement offerings, and these are the types of investments that large institutions will do, or if you're an accredited investor, you have the opportunity to invest in these types of products. So we have a team of lawyers who look at the offering. They make sure that they're not making outlandish claims, that the business is legitimate. They look for a lot of things just to make sure that it's legitimate and that there won't be any issues. The third P is problems. This is our enforcement area. So our enforcement team basically deal with the bad people. So if people are selling products, they're not registered, if they're selling a fake product, or something just is not right, we investigate these situations through a team of investigators. And if we decide there's something that needs to go even further, we have the ability to take it as far as getting criminal charges, going and working with a county prosecutor to bring a case. And we also have the ability to issue civil and other types of penalties. So that's a really big part of what we do, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The fourth one is prevention, educating consumers, which is kind of what we're doing today. Victoria and I both spent a lot of our time, or we have spent a lot of our time on the road, going out and talking to groups, organizations. I go to a lot of senior centers, working with law enforcement, just a lot of organizations where we're trying to get out, educate the public about who we are, what we do, how to be smart consumers, how not to get defrauded. Obviously, we're doing a webinar today. We've kind of pivoted because we're not able to get out and travel and be in front of people. So doing webinars like this is another way to reach people. And again, we appreciate the opportunity to be doing that today. So let me talk about what I a lot of times tell people are some of the key red flags of fraud that you need to be looking for if you're approached to make an investment or invest in something or work with a person. Here are the ones that are the most common that we hear about, which could be a possible fraud situation. The first one is unreasonable interest rates. These days, if you've got a bank account or some kind of a savings account, you're getting a couple of percentage interest if you're lucky. If you're investing in the market, before the downturn in the market, if you probably got 6, 8, 10%, you were doing pretty well. But if someone says, hey, I can get you 30% return on your investment and I can make that happen in less than a month, that's a red flag. Unreasonable interest rates should always be a concern and something you want to check. The second red flag is a pressure to buy immediately. This is one we hear all the time. Hey, this offer is only good today. I need your answer by 6 o'clock. It's going away. They try to put pressure on you to buy it, and you should never be pressured to buy something right away, especially if you're on the phone or texting or emailing somebody. That's just not the best way to do it. If it's a legitimate offer, that offer should be good for at least some time to give you a chance to do some research, ask questions. So a person should never be pressured to buy any kind of investment right away. Third one is inexplicable business practices. Now, this could be a lot of things. It could be maybe you're not getting regular statements. Maybe your phone calls aren't getting returned. Maybe they're telling you to make that check out to them personally or to cash, not to the investment of the business. These are red flags you have to be looking for. And then the big one really is a promise of no risk or guaranteed. We hear this one a lot. There's really no investment that doesn't have some sort of risk. And if you ever read the fine print or you see an advertisement on TV, you're always going to hear that little part about, hey, you could lose money. So if anybody says, hey, I guarantee you're going to make money on this, that's a huge red flag, because again, any legitimate investment is definitely going to have some risk. So let me talk about some of the frauds that we typically see, and these are based on a lot of the cases we get. The first one I'll call is Affinity Fraud. And Affinity Fraud is something that happens usually within a specific group. The person who's perpetrating the fraud, they try to get into some kind of a group and develop trust among that group. We see this sadly in churches and other religious organizations, where they become friendly with the pastor or the church members. We had a case actually up in Northeast Ohio a number of years ago, where the person got on finance committee of the church, so he kind of knew where all the money was. So these are areas where we do see a lot of problems. Professional groups, social and recreational clubs. We've had issues where a guy joins a golf league or a bowling league, and he hangs out with these guys for a while and becomes friends. And then after a while, after he's gained a little bit of trust and feels like one of the gang, he'll say, hey, I've got this great idea, or would you like to invest in my business, or something like that. And people, they don't really do their research. They don't follow up if that person's legitimate. They don't check to see if the products that they're offering is legitimate. There's a trust element that they have built up, and they think, well, this person's not going to rip me off. He's a member of my club. But it does happen. So this is something people need to be aware of. Sadly, we also see this happen with relatives. We've got neighbors. Again, you get approached by somebody who says, I've got an idea. Would you like to invest in something? And again, because they're a relative and they've lived next door to you for 20 years, why would they rip you off? But these are things you do have to be careful of. A lot of times we hear about new friends that come into a person's life. This happens especially with older people. They may have somebody new that comes into their life, a new friend that they met through, again, one of these organizations or some other way, and suddenly we find out that that person's taking advantage of that person. So affinity fraud is really a big one. We see a lot, it happens a lot in our cases. Some of you may have heard the term boiler room. The term comes from high pressure tactics. And so boiler rooms do still occur. There's some legitimate activity as far as people making phone calls, trying to, sell you something. I think you should always be careful no matter what. But, the boiler rooms where we have the problems are fly-by-night places. They get a handful of people in a room and a bunch of phones, and they start dialing people up out of the blue and try to pitch them on something. You see this in a lot of movies sometimes. And again, we tell people, look, if you get a call that you didn't initiate and someone's trying to sell you something, just hang up. It's probably not worth your time. Ponzi schemes. This is one probably a lot of people hear about. And sometimes these schemes are connected with affinity fraud because, again, of the relationships that people built. So the Ponzi scheme was named after Charles Ponzi, who was a con artist in the 1920s who got involved in a lot of different things. But the scheme that's named after him had a couple of key elements. One was a high rate of return. He promised that people could get 100% of their money back in a month. And then what would happen was he would tell people at the end of that time, hey, why don't you just roll your money over and stick with me, and I will keep making money for you. And then issuing false statements. There's just no legitimacy to a person's account. Things we've made up. And this kind of thing happens today. The Bernie Madoff case is very similar. It's pretty much a classic Ponzi scheme. Some other things to know about Ponzi scheme. The idea is that you're going to take money from one person and give it to another. So what typically happens is the early investors are putting money into a pot, and that money then is paid back from people who invest later on. And a lot of times this happens because the early investors are through word of mouth telling people, hey, you need to get involved in this and invest. And that's how the Ponzi continues to build, because of these connections that people have to get others involved. And so the scam keeps rolling because they're constantly recruiting new investors. The problem with this, and this is what happened in Ponzi's case, this is what happened in the Madoff case, that the scheme usually collapses when there's no new investors and the current investors want their money as promised. And eventually all that money is either not going to be available or it's already gone, and you're just not going to see that money. And sadly, in a lot of our cases, there is no money at the end if people are trying to get their money back. These folks have spent that money, or maybe they gambled it away or lost it in some way. And if people get any money back, it's usually pennies on the dollar. But sadly, in a lot of cases, there is no money. So that's just a classic problem when you hear about a Ponzi scheme. And one of the other interesting factors about this is that sometimes these early investors who may have gotten money back because of the money collected by the older or the later investors, sometimes the government will make those early investors forfeit the money that they got back. It's called a clawback, and essentially they consider it as a dirty gain, and you might have to give that money back. Now, that's not always the case. Every case is different, but there's always that possibility that even people who won out in the beginning may lose out in the end. So I talked a little bit about risk and some of the other things that you need to consider before you get into any kind of investment. And again, the first one is, you need to ask, what are the risks? Can I lose all of my money? As I said before, if you read the documentation that comes with any kind of investment, which you should get, and if you don't get documentation, that's a red flag. It should say that, there is a risk here. You could lose some or all of your money. So you have to really balance what that risk is. And again, these are the kind of questions you should be asking a person. Liquidity is another one. Everybody's investment situation is different. Some people, can put their money away for a long time. Other people think, well, I might need some money here after a certain period of time for something. So you need to know that when you invest in something, how quickly can I get the funds? Again, these things should all be spelled out in the agreement in terms of, can you get your money? If you can, is there a fee, or do you lose something with that? It's really important to know, how liquid is that investment? Suitability is the next one. This is really huge. As I said, every investment opportunity is different. Everybody's needs are different. You need to determine if this investment is going to accomplish your overall investing goals. Are you saving for retirement? Are you putting money away for something special? What is really the reason, and does this product meet that criteria? Because again, products are different. You should also know, if you're working with someone, how much maybe they're getting paid. Depending on who you're working with, you may pay a fee, either monthly or quarterly, based on the amount of money you have in the firm or the investment. There may be other fees involved. If you're working with a stockbroker, they get paid on commission. And again, you can be working with someone who does a little bit of both. So it's important to ask, how are these folks getting paid? What's the expectation? I'm going to skip to the last one because it's also important to understand the products. As I said earlier, investing can be very complicated. There's a lot of products out there. There's a lot of things you need to know about how they work. And before you invest in something, you really need to understand what that product is and how it works. And so you should always keep asking questions until you understand it. If there's somebody else you can go to, an attorney or a CPA or somebody who may have a little bit of better background, go to them and see what they think. It's just great to be educated. Luckily, we have the internet. You can have a lot of resources out there, and actually I'll point to some here in a little bit. But understanding the product is really key. The last one really kind of covers everything. Trust but verify. Going back to the beginning, is the person who you're working with legitimate? Are they licensed to do what they do in the state they're operating in? Is the product that they're offering, is it registered? Has it been evaluated either on a state or a federal basis? These are things that you have to know before you invest in any kind of a product or work with a person. So a little bit about what we can do from the Division of Securities if you're in a situation where you're not sure. As I said earlier, we can confirm the people of the products. We have the ability to, because of the licensing process, we can check people out, we can see their background, we can see their education, we can see if they have any issues or complaints against them. So if you give us a call, and I'll have the number up here in a little bit, we can talk about who that person is. Now, we can't recommend somebody, and we certainly can't recommend a product. We can only tell you, again, if that person is licensed to do what they do. We can also check out products. Again, if you get approached on a certain type of investment, depending on what it is and where it's registered, we can maybe look at that and give you some advice as far as what that product may be. Again, we can coordinate any kind of investigation if someone suspects they've been defrauded, or maybe they want to check something out. We have a team of investigators that can do that research. And then if we find any problems, as I said earlier, our enforcement team deals with the bad actors, and so we can conduct all kinds of proceedings. We can go after them administratively. We can invoke civil action, or, as I said, we can put a case together and take it to the county prosecutor and decide whether the grand jury is going to hear that. And if they do, we'll work with the county prosecutor on that case, provide testimony, provide all kinds of information and evidence, and see where that case goes. So that's how we can help. And so what I tell people is the number one way to prevent fraud is check before you invest. And people have probably heard this said 1,000 times. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And that is certainly the case here when we're talking about securities or any kind of investments. So on the screen, I have some information, some resources. Our general phone number is there, and then we have our investor protection hotline. Now those numbers these days, obviously, because people are working from home, are not manned all the time, but our staff do check the email and the voicemail every day. So if you think there's an issue, call that number, leave a message, and we'll get back to you. The next line there is our website, and if you go there, you'll see a couple of pages for consumers with all kinds of brochures and literature and what have you. And there's tons of information on there. You can download all that material. It's all there for people's use. Two federal outlets I want to also point you to. FINRA's broker check is similar to what we can do as far as doing background information on investment advisors. If you go to that website, you can put in the person's name. It may ask you for some other information, such as the name of the firm or maybe where they're located. And again, it's going to pull up a record of their background, who they've worked for, past work histories, their licenses. Again, if there's any problems with their license, that information is all there for you to look at. Again, it's not a recommendation, but it's just a guide to help you decide, is this somebody that I want to work with? They also have a lot of other good information on the FINRA website. Much like our site, there's literature and other types of information. And the last one is investor.gov. This is the Securities and Exchange Commission site. Again, a really robust site of all kinds of information, literature. There's some fun interactive games and tests and things you can take just to see, what kind of investor, are you, what's your level of understanding. It's really, really a good site, and I would always recommend people maybe check that out as well. So those are really the high-level things I want to talk about in terms of investment and securities fraud. And so if Victoria is ready, we can switch over to her, Pam.
Awesome. And then I do just want to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded, so it'll be posted on the Better Business Bureau Cleveland's YouTube page, and we will be sending it out to our accredited businesses. So if anyone does have any questions or needs that information, please feel free to contact me, and I'll be able to send it to you. And Victoria, I'll pass that on to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So like Dan mentioned, my name is Victoria Yerkvik, and I'm the Office of Consumer Affairs Manager for the Division of Financial Institutions. And to just quickly kind of go over the Division of Financial Institutions, we regulate Ohio banks and money transmitters as well as credit unions. So any bank or credit union that you might potentially bank with in the state of Ohio has two options on how they are regulated, licensed. They have the options of having it specifically through the federal government, or they can be regulated through us at a more local state level. So there are a number of banks and money transmitters. And when we speak about money transmitters, we're focusing on those entities that transmit money, whether it be Western Union, whether it's like a Venmo, Google Pay, Amazon Pay. We have a large amount of licensees through our money transmitter section. There's about approximately 140 that we regulate. Any of those entities that you work with, whether you do use Google Pay, Amazon, Venmo, Western Union, if they operate in a state, they have to be licensed with that state. So we have that great opportunity to license and regulate them properly. Credit unions, like I mentioned too, also all Ohio credit unions are regulated and examined by us. We also regulate and license consumer finance entities. So that can be your mortgage lenders and brokers, short-term loans, small loans, precious metal dealers. So think payday lending is also something that we kind of govern here in the state of Ohio. And then also within our division, we have obviously our legal team, our admin team, and then the Office of Consumer Affairs, which I manage. So the Office of Consumer Affairs is really to promote the division's role in protecting Ohioans, whether that's through educational experiences or opportunities, outreach initiatives. When we were able to travel, obviously we try to participate in committee events. We do conduct trainings for industry groups and other agencies. We also like to handle the consumer complaints that we can take in regards to certain specific entities that we regulate. So whether that's the state chartered financial institutions or consumer finance companies, or make proper referrals if we need to. We do have a hotline, which I will give out towards the end of the presentation. And then we also administer the financial literacy program, and that includes developing guidelines for the grants, reviewing them, and making recommendations. And we're actually in the process of picking our awardees for the fiscal year 21. So what I really wanted to kind of talk about today is the ways that we get our resources and our information so that we are able to better educate our consumers. So one of the biggest resources that we use to kind of understand what's happening in the financial fraud and scam world is the Federal Trade Commission, so the FTC. They regularly put out quarterly reports that kind of give us an idea what's happening nationwide as well as what's happening in Ohio. And what they specifically did this year, because of the pandemic, was they conducted a separate report for COVID-19 and stimulus checks that were coming through. So the data that I'm going to kind of briefly go over is from the last 6 months. And it's very interesting because you'll notice with financial scams, when they happen, they're very trendy. So there can be trends that are common that happen year after year, but depending on a specific area or something that triggers a specific scam or fraud situation, it might become the most important one or might become the top ranked scam for the year. So the FTC kind of breaks it down into different categories. The overview on this slide, you'll notice, is in the last 6 months, they've taken about 105,257 overall reports. They did report that that is a total of 69 million fraud loss. So they're saying about 48% of the reports have indicated some type of monetary loss. And when they calculated that, it came down to a breakdown of $288 per median fraud loss. So when people look at that $288, for some people that's not a lot, for some it's a lot of money. But regardless of what you think that amount means to you, the fact is that in the last 6 months, there have been consumers who have lost $69 million because of a financial scam that was a product of COVID-19, unfortunately. So the next slide kind of goes into a deeper understanding of how they break down their categories. So when they talk about fraud reports, they're really looking at, you'll see the top 10 ranked in categories. They're looking at your imposter scams, so scammers pretending to be certain financial institutions or maybe government agencies. They're looking at fraud when it comes to telephone and mobile services, online shopping, which is a huge problem, internet services, your prize sweepstake lottery scams, foreign money offers, counterfeit check scams. So someone offers you a check to do a job for them and it ends up being counterfeit and you cashed it and now you're out of that money. Travel, vacation, timeshare issues, business, job opportunities, healthcare, and advanced payments for credit services. When they talk about identity theft in their reports, they're really looking at how someone has retrieved your personal information. So whether that's through credit card fraud or a specific situation where your identity is stolen, whether it's through loans, phone utility fraud, bank fraud, employment or tax related fraud, or if government documents or benefits frauds are stolen as well. And then when they look at the other category, they break that down into more specific situations, like if your information was stolen through a credit bureau check, if it's through a local bank or lender, whether that's human error or mobile banking situation, debt collection, credit cards, television, media, education, home repair situations, computer, or funeral services. So to kind of give you an understanding of the overall fraud reports, about half of the total reports that have been calculated in the last 6 months have been in their fraud category. That is, if you look at the top 5, that would be online shopping, which was ranked number 1, and then ranked number 2 is your travel and vacation. You'll notice though that travel and vacation had a bigger monetary loss, and that's usually because travel and vacation, we're talking about thousands of dollars for a lot of families. When they book vacations, it has to be canceled because there's a stay-at-home order or because something occurred where they're no longer allowed to travel internationally, whether we're allowed in and out of the country, whatever the case might be, there's going to be a greater loss with dealing with that. And what a lot of people fell victim to is they were trying to get reimbursements or their money back or something of that sort, and they were out of loss because a scammer got a hold of information. So those were the top 2, and then you'll notice 2 of the top reports there was text messaging fraud. So a lot of times people in the last few months have received text messages which they thought were legitimate, whether it be from a financial institution or an offer of some sort, whether it be job or opportunity, or if they just thought it was a friend or somebody trying to help them out in a situation, they could have fell victim to a scam. Internet information services, and then healthcare, diet products, doctors' plans was also a big target. When you look at the fraud reports and how those people were contacted, the largest contact or the top number 1 ranked way that they were contacted for these fraud situations was through the phone. And then you'll notice that website was ranked number 2 with a greater monetary loss. Then it was email. And then 4th was consumer initiated contact. So if somebody was looking for help with a situation, this happened a lot for forbearance issues. So if someone had a mortgage and they couldn't make their payment, they would try to reach out to somebody to help them get into a forbearance period so that they were able to stall making the payment on their mortgage. When the information was released to kind of do this, a lot of people didn't know the right way to go about it. So they were it ran into scam situations where they reached out to somebody thinking that would help them, and obviously it was a scammer. So that's an example of a consumer initiated contact. Obviously they have an other category and then the mail contact. And then ways that money was taken from them. Credit card fraud is obviously always going to be at the top of the ranking list, because it's easy for scammers to obtain credit card information, whether it's because you enter credit card information on your phone, or if you enter it on a website, or if you've used a public ATM or gas station and there might have been a skimmer attached. Scammers are able to retrieve a lot of credit card numbers because of the easy way that they can get around collecting it. So that was ranked number 1. And then there are situations where your bank account debit was compromised, internet, mobile. There was a category they put in there that was non-reported. Wire transfer was also a payment method. And you'll notice that wire transfer had the largest monetary loss of fraud. And that's not uncommon because it's so easy for someone to fall victim to a scam, rush to a brick and mortar money transmitter location and wire transfer a large amount of money. When scammers target credit cards and debit cards, they try to be a little safe with how they pool funds. They do small payments gradually and then maybe a larger payment. But when it comes to wire transfer, if they catch you just in an inopportune time, they can really convince you to send them a lot of money. And then gift and reload cards can be targeted cash advance, checks, money orders, and then telephone bills. And then this slide really talks about of age groups who are really targeted in the last 6 months. It's kind of common for our younger population to not be as big of a target because of the fact that they don't have a lot of money, especially your teenagers. If they do, they have jobs that are paying very minimal. So they're not our biggest top rank. But you'll notice as you go from the age of 20 to about 50, that's where you see your greatest loss in your larger amount of reports. And then you'll kind of see it dips a little bit down 60 and up. And a lot of times people think when they see that there's only been about 400 reports for those that are 80 and over, that our elderly are not victim to a lot of scams. And that's probably the farthest from the truth. Unfortunately, when somebody who's older gets targeted with a scam, a family member is helping them through the situation. And a lot of times that family member doesn't think to report it properly, or there is situations where that elderly person does not want to report it because it's either a close family member or it's a situation of embarrassment. So a lot of times I like to remind folks that the numbers for those that are older can be a little bit skewed because only 1 in 44 financial elder abuse cases are ever really reported. So we always have to keep in mind when we're educating our consumers that are older that there are going to be certain statistics that are a little bit off, but we still need to keep them in the loop and keep them proactive in protecting their assets and their money. And then just to kind of quickly go over the other categories, obviously the fraud category was the largest amount. It was half the COVID-19 stimulus complaints for the last 6 months. But then there also was that other category that really tapped into credit card fraud that had to deal with your bank or your savings and loans location or credit union, fraud with a mortgage, credit bureaus, and then television cable services. And then there was identity theft. The identity theft category is pretty self-explanatory. Any way that they retrieved personal information from you, they calculated that as an identity theft situation. And then there was the do not call category. So real quick, for the do not call category, I just want to point out that the top reports had to do with imposters, so those pretending to be other people. A lot of times it's government agencies or financial institutions, medical prescriptions, reducing debt options. So that is something that can really target a group of consumers, especially those that are financially stuck because of a pandemic such as COVID-19, warranty protection plans, and then energy, solar, utilities. You'll also see that out of those reports, about 70% of them were robocalls and 30% were live callers. Now, this was a nationwide statistic, but if you really hone into what's been happening in the state of Ohio, you might have noticed that back in April, May, and maybe even now, your robocalls have kind of shortened or decreased, or they're just not as big of a problem as they probably were in the past few years. And the reason is that the Attorney General's office actually implemented a new section within one of their fraud divisions that is trying to stay on top of robocalls for Ohioans and really zero in on cutting them down, especially those robocalls that share the same area code as you, because those are always tricky. If my area code is 614 and I see a number from 614, I'm assuming it's a doctor's office, or it's a pharmacy, or it's my dentist, or somebody of that sort. But for a while in the past few years, it's been just scammers. So the AG's office has really been proactive into trying to help that, especially for those in our state. And then I did pull the statistics for Ohio. Ohio wasn't that badly affected by COVID. We only had about 2,700 overall reports. We did have a total fraud loss calculated at about 1.38 million, which 42% of the fraud reports indicated a type of loss. So that came out to about 300. And then the top reports for Ohioans was really geared towards travel, vacation, online shopping, credit cards, bank saving loans, credit unions, interaction, and then text messages. But when I looked at the top rankings of states, Ohio was kind of in the bottom half. So we've done very well compared to other states that were affected. So as I continue, I do want to talk about some common financial scams that readily happen year after year, and then how they were kind of affected by COVID or how they changed a little bit. And then I'm going to go into some proactive awareness and some tips if you still are affected by the current pandemic. So I did mention the imposter scam earlier. And really briefly, the imposter scam always tends to be one of the top financial scams that happens to consumers because it's a phone call and it's somebody acting as if you're going to be in trouble or someone's just trying to get a hold of you. So in this situation, an imposter tells a woman or man, and it could be any age, to really act quickly so they don't get in trouble, convince them that they're legitimate, and they really are hard for them to send the money, whether it's wire transfer or if it's sending it through an app or providing some type of personal information. So you'll notice that people in the past have been targeted. You know, the FBI is trying to get a hold of me, or the IRS has had imposter scams in the past. So any type of situation where somebody is trying to represent an agency or company or somebody else, and they target you and get you to send them money, that's an imposter scam. Now, how it's relatable to COVID, we saw a handful of examples, and one of them was a victim received a call or email from the IRS or the Office of the President stating that they needed more information to process his or her stimulus payment. So that was the situation we saw. Another one that we saw, and it could still happen, is a woman receives a random phone call from a man named Joe, and he's supposedly a customer rep from her bank. Very vague, doesn't give a lot of specifics, and he just states that he's calling to check in on her or wants to update some personal information to assure that her funds are safe. It's very, very, very rare that the bank or the credit union that you do your banking with will contact you, especially during a time when they were overwhelmed with PPE or small business applications, or they were had a lot of forbearance issues that they had to deal with, or any of the situations with establishing lending and loans. So when that kind of happens, you just know that it's most likely a scam. And then another situation was that we see, because I regularly check in with the Ohio Department of Insurance, a man calls an elderly woman and states that she needs to provide updated personal information to make sure that her Medicare is up to date and ready to go in case of an emergency. So he asks, for a social security number or as well as a Medicare card number. And this really hits a lot of elderly at this time because unfortunately COVID was affecting our elderly a little bit more than our other age groups, especially those that were hospitalized. So to stir up, extra excitement into an elderly woman or man and kind of say, oh, you have to have this all ready to go in case of an emergency, they may not be thinking clearly and they might act on it and give them information that they normally may not. The other well-known scam that unfortunately affects especially those that are elderly is a grandparent scam. And just quickly, that usually is when a victim receives a call from a young adult pretending to be their grandchild or maybe grandniece or nephew. They claim to be in trouble. Perhaps they're in jail in a different city or country. Usually it's spring break oriented. And they tell grandma or grandpa, don't tell my parents, I don't want them to worry. And they just ask, send me money immediately. I just need your help. Well, they kind of changed it a little bit when it came to COVID because instead of it being a spring break situation or a vacation in jail scenario, now it's an elderly person receiving a call from a young adult pretending to be their grandchild who just is in need of money because he lost his job due to COVID, or he can't pay his rent because maybe he was a bartender and they were temporarily closed. So they, of course, tell grandpa, don't tell my parents, I just don't want them to worry, but I just need you to wire me some money because I don't have any right now and I need your help. So unfortunately, a lot of elderly fell victim to COVID-related money situations because of that. The sweetheart scam is also a common financial scam that happens. This year, it really was just about where somebody was getting funds or how they were targeting them. So sweetheart scams target women and men who are over 50, and it can happen in person or online. During this time, a lot of it was online. Con artists convince victims they're in love and proceed to extract money from them over a period of time. Sometimes it can be to an extent of draining someone's retirement savings. So during COVID, an example of something happening similar to this would be a woman in her 50s just began to talk to a new love interest in maybe, let's say, April. And she kind of lets him know when she gets her stimulus payment, and he suddenly, all of a sudden, is needing money because he can't pay for his bills and he doesn't have a job. So she sends him money because now she has the stimulus payment. She thinks, oh, I can, help him out and give it to him. And then there are situations where after their money is drained or after they've wired money over to them, all of a sudden they don't hear from them again. And then one of the other scams that sometimes pops in and out depending on the economy and what's happening is refinance mortgage scams. So in this situation, a current homeowner is trying to refinance their loan and gets assistance with paying the mortgage payment. Scammers can use email, phone calls, flyers, direct mail, but really they're just trying to, design to steal your money or your personal information. And they typically ask for a lot of personal information that includes social security and date of birth. And they're really, what they're doing is this, buying your information so they can kind of sell it to somebody else. During COVID, because there were so many issues with people not being able to pay their mortgages on time or people being out of work, so they need to kind of refinance or they need to look into forbearance options, we saw that some homeowners were trying to refinance their loan due to low interest rates and get assistance, but they weren't using their current lender. And they were using just a company they found online, or they were just looking online for ways to get help, and it was just a bunch of scammers or fake websites, fake contact information. So we try to be proactive in letting folks know where they should get the correct information to make sure that they're actually getting the help and assistance that they need. So how does the Division of Financial Institutions stay on top of scams and other concerns? By evaluating the FTC complaint reports, not only the COVID reports, but the general over the year reports that they give out. They always print beginning of every year, they always give you a overview of the prior year. I also view other sources that really is focused on financial scams and how they affect any consumer, any age. We also find common trends among the calls that we receive through our consumer hotline. And like I mentioned, I'll kind of share that consumer hotline number with you. Consumer hotline, the OCA's consumer hotline is really geared towards giving you the opportunity to file a complaint against an Ohio regulated or licensed entity. But obviously there are times where the caller doesn't know that, and we will hear of a scam or a situation that's affecting them that maybe the OCC can help them actually file the complaint. But it's still something we track, because if it's happening in our state, we want to know. We also do connect with other state financial agencies for trending scams that could potentially come our way. We have lots of conversations with the state of Indiana, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Michigan, even as far as Milwaukee and some of the other Midwestern states. It's just really important to be sharing information, especially if it's specific companies or specific institutions that are causing scams or issues, just so we kind of have an awareness if it's coming our way. And then with COVID specifically, we did notice that there was increased activity with stimulus check deposits and loan forbearance applications with our banks and credit unions. So we were just regularly checking in to make sure that they were aware of any issues or letting us know if they were coming across any scams themselves. The last thing I kind of want to dive into is stimulus payment scams and a couple information about running credit reports. Stimulus payment scams are still kind of going on, or stimulus payment issues in general. So I'm just giving an awareness for anybody that hasn't received their economic impact payment. You should have at this point, but if you haven't, it could be because it landed into the hands of an identity theft scammer. So you would want to report that with the FTC and the IRS. And if you just go to identitytheft.gov, there is an option to get started. The next page will kind of talk to you which statement best describes your situation. And then they have a specific category for filed federal tax return or claimed an economic stimulus payment using information. And then you're kind of set to be able to get that report started. We also have heard a couple situations where stimulus payments aren't arriving for elderly parents and grandparents, especially those that live in nursing homes or assisted living facilities. And it could be that that actual nursing home or assisted living facility has taken the stimulus check straight from the person. And this is just a FYI to anybody that might have a family member in nursing home or assisted living. Under the CARES Act, that stimulus payment is a tax credit. So that nursing home or assisted living facility cannot seize that check. It is to go to the person. So if you have that situation, or if you know of anyone, or just want to share that information with someone that you think might be affected, the best way to get a handle on that is to report it with the Ohio Attorney General's office. And then there are some situations where someone still may be waiting for an economic impact payment, and instead of receiving an actual check or direct deposit, they're going to be getting a debit card. So just an FYI, when you receive debit cards, something like this in the mail, you're going to want to look for specific information that lets you know it's a legitimate debit card. So for this, it's going to be from Money Network Card Holder Service. It's going to be a Visa branded prepaid card, and it's going to be issued by MetaBank, and you're going to want to activate it immediately. And you also, just to keep in mind, no one's going to text you, email, or ask you to click on links to activate your card, or try to send you information of that sort, because if they're trying to contact you outside of the mail, it's most likely going to be a scam. I always tell people that deal with Social Security, with Medicare, with any government agency, the best way that they get a hold of you is through the mail. They don't have the time or availability to be able to contact people through email or through phone. And then because of the financial impact that the coronavirus has had on many consumers nationwide, a lot of people are really living in an uncertain time right now about their financial health. So all three national credit reporting agencies, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, are giving the opportunity of people to weekly check their credit report. In the past, you were given the opportunity of checking your credit report for free 2 times per year, but now because of everything that's happened, they're actually allowing people to regularly check it weekly. You can get a free report through www.annualcreditreport.com, and this is actually going to be happening for the next year. So it's really important if you don't have credit alerts, or if you don't have, a credit freeze. Sometimes people freeze their credit if they don't really need to have it open for access because maybe they fell victim to a scam previously and they just want to protect themselves from going through that again. If you don't have those alarms or alerts set in place, you might want to just be weekly checking to make sure that your credit report looks like it should. So again, if you have a complaint that you need to file against a state charter bank, credit union, or consumer finance company, you can always call us at the division, and the Office of Consumer Affairs hotline is listed there, 866-278-0003. We also do have a lot of information on our website, and you'll notice it's there to the left, com.ohio.gov/FIIN. I do try to keep up to date with consumer resources and links so that you have availability to look on FTC's website for information, CSBS, which deals with a lot of banking information, just so we keep aware and are educating constantly online. And I do regularly try to post current up-to-date information on our Twitter page, which is @OhioDFI, just to make sure that if you're a younger person and you're looking for information via social media, or if you just regularly are on Twitter, we have access and information of consumer resources available there too.
Thank you both so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Pam. We appreciate it as well.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful day.